Hey guys, it's Scott from Axle Boy. I just wanted to have a little talk today about Off-Roading 101. One of the first things I like to talk about in this series of how to get off-road and how to get into the sport is the wheels and tires. And I really feel like wheels and tires are one of the first things we look at. Ideally, to get the most ground clearance we can from the lowest point of your vehicle, we're going to have to put bigger tires on it. We can put a lift kit on it all day long, but the differential and the center section of the axle are always going to be one of the lowest points on our vehicle. Changing the tire size is really the only way we have to make that change. When we're looking at the wheels and tires, we have to understand the different kinds. We have mud terrains, we have hybrids, we have all-terrains. And what's the difference of those tires and which one should you choose? I want to be completely honest with you and say that when we're working with tires, it's always a little bit of a compromise. We're always giving up something to get something.
So we usually start off the Jeep as in terms of designing and figuring out how you want to modify it. We usually are going to start off with tires. And before we do that, I like to ask a lot of questions. So what are you going to use the Jeep for? Is this going to be your daily driver? Is this going to get you to work? Going to the grocery store? Is it strictly off-road? Is it something in between? Most of us are in between. We probably spend 70% of our time on the road, 30% off-road. And yet we always want to compromise for that off-road ability. Another thing to think about is what's your total budget? How much are you really willing to spend to get what you need? Larger tires, people tend to want the biggest tire they can get. Every time you go up a size in tire, you go up in cost. You go up in needed modifications to support the additional weight and traction. Certain brand names can carry a premium price, and how does that figure into the equation?
Recognition of the brands, performance, size, these are all going to be price related. So we want to find brands that are going to put us in the best bang for the buck. We want to find brands that are going to perform with our tier 1 tires, our BF Goodrich, our Goodyear. But we like to find tires that are just a little bit less expensive, that are more of a private niche brand, that are going to be a little friendlier. We like the tires from Vulcan Tire, we like the Mickey Thompson tires, we like the Cooper tires. These are all tires we've had extremely good luck with to compete with all your tier 1 brands for considerably less cost. So one of the things I get asked all the time with an off-road rig is, do I need to get 5 matching wheels and tires? If you're going to be out in the woods or you're going to be out in the trail, you really need to have access to a spare. You're going to be putting your tires up against rocks, up against logs, various obstacles. You're going to be on rough gravel roads with sharp chipping gravel with sharp edges on it. The possibility of tire damage is pretty high. I know now a lot of Jeep people and a lot of pickup people, they don't want that big tire hanging off the back or stuck in the bed of the truck. The reality is if you're driving a short distance to work, that's probably fine. But when you're 3 hours back into a trail and you shred a sidewall, what are you going to do? You're going to hope somebody comes along the trail, or you're going to have a pretty good hike. I do feel it's important to have a matching size. When I say size, I'm talking about height or circumference, not necessarily width. I'm not as concerned with having the exact same wheel and tire as I am about having the same circumference and the same height of the tire, the same offset of the wheel. That means if you can find a tire that's narrower, that has the same height, I'm okay with that. That'll still get you off the trail. But I am a believer in having a spare. If you're going to be overlanding, you're going to be traveling where nobody else is going very often, and you do not want to be stranded on that road. So having the capability to get your rig back on the road with a damaged tire is going to be really important.
As we're starting to choose the types of tires that we might want to put on our Jeep, we have to understand how each tire is designed. The all-season tire is what most of our Wrangler Sports and Saharas come with. And this tire has a lot of rain siping. It's very quiet on the highway. It has low drag and low resistance. It gets better gas mileage. But when we get off in the mud or we get into some of the loose aggregate, we find that they're going to slip and they're not going to be worth very much. Head into a muddy field with a set of all-season tires, you're probably not going to get out on your own. The next step up in tires is going to be the all-terrain tire. Now, an all-terrain tire is generally designed to be just as friendly on-road as it is off-road. And this tire is going to be pretty quiet running down the highway. We're not going to hear a lot of howl or tire noise from it. We're still going to get mileage ratings where we can say, yeah, this is a 55,000 mile tire. I expect if I maintain it, I can put at least 50,000 miles on it, possibly even have a tread wear warranty. It's going to be good in the snow and the rain. It's going to handle those conditions good. It's going to be decent off in the loose gravel and on the dirt. It'll be okay in the mud, but without the large lugs that are needed to clear out the mud, sometimes they can lack a little bit and get packed. In general, the all-terrain tire fits most people's needs as long as they're not planning on being in mud. I think the most common tire that we see in our dual-purpose Jeep is the what I would call the mud terrain tire, the MT tire. This is going to perform pretty decent in the rain, on the rocks. We're going to get decent snow. We do have a little bit of rain technology, although not as much. Now, the drawback to this tire is that we're going to have some drag. We're going to lose a little bit of fuel economy. Our rolling resistance is going to increase. We're also not going to get a mileage warranty or a mileage expectation. So it's kind of like you buy it, you get what you get, you hope for the best. We're going to pick up a little bit of road noise. We're going to have some humming. The distance and the voids of the tire is where we're going to get that noise from. They do have some good technology now, such as asymmetrical tread design, which helps cancel out noise. But in general, we can expect this to create a little more volume going down the highway. So I wanted to showcase two different styles of tire. The average mud terrain, this happens to be a Falken Wild Peak MT, and then an all-terrain, which happens to be a Falken Wild Peak AT3W. If we compare the two tires, one of the first things that we notice is that the mud terrain has a much larger lug on the side, and this is going to give us more grabbing capability over obstacles. It's also going to give us a wider area to eject and push mud out and clear the tire out. Now, we do have a little bit of lug space in this all-terrain, but not overly, not too much. This one isn't going to clear out the mud as much. This is going to pack. We also can take a look that the all-terrain tire has a lot of small cuts in it. Now, these little cuts are called siping, and this is what gives us our traction in wet and snow. Now, our mud terrain tire didn't forget us. It's still got some siping in there, just not nearly as much. Every time we have an edge like this, we have the potential for noise. So as you can see, the mud terrain's spread out a lot more. The all-terrain is a lot tighter of a pattern. This is going to keep our noise down. This is going to keep it from singing on the highway. This is going to give us edges to grab onto large obstacles and get through the rocks and the mud. Another type of tire that I want to talk about is a dedicated off-road tire. This is going to be a very aggressive tire, huge voids in between. Typically, the compounds that the rubber are made out of is going to be really soft. And this is great for things like rocks and boulders and getting out there and doing some serious crawling. The problem is it's going to wear out really fast. It's going to be extremely noisy on the highway. In general, they're not round. They're so thick and heavy. They're not going to balance well, so our comfort level on the highway is going to be considerably lower. Now, if you're building a trailer rig, I think it's a great idea. If you're just going to go out and you're just planning on four-wheeling, then this type of tire is going to work great for you. But if you're taking the kids to church on Sunday, I think you're going to be a little bit disappointed.
If you're looking to do things like get through the snow without any trouble, those all-terrain tires are going to be more the choice as well. When we get into the mud terrain tire, we have a lot of voids in there. It will grip the snow, it will get you moving, but they don't stop or corner nearly as well. So in general, for road purposes, that all-terrain is probably the best compromise. However, if we live in the Midwest or something like that, and we're going to have our rig off in the mud or in the field, there's just no trading out for a mud terrain tire. We're going to need those blocks. We're going to need to be able to spin them, and we're going to need to be able to throw the mud out. The only way to do that is to spread out those voids and get them separated.
Before we start picking the size of our tire, we need to understand the two different ways the tires are sized. The first way is going to be what I'm going to call the P-metric sizes. This is going to be using the metric system, and we're going to hear something like a 315 70 R18. Now, what this means is that 315, that's the widest part of the tire at the cross section, it's called, which is the widest part, not necessarily the tread, but just the widest part of the tire. 70 is an aspect ratio, and this is a percentage. So basically what it's telling you is from the rim to the tread is 70% of that 315 millimeters. If it was a 75, the tire would be a little bit taller compared to the width. The R means it's a radial tire. And then 18, that means that's the rim size. That's the size of the wheel that we have. Now, if we look at the standard sizes, what's often known as flotation sizes or, good old American sizes, what we're gonna see there is we're gonna see a 35 1250 R18. So what does that generally mean? It means 35 inches tall, 1250 wide at the cross section. Our R is gonna mean the same thing. That's gonna mean a radial tire. And then the last number is always going to be our wheel size. Basically, we find that these two tires are almost exactly the same. One's just looked at from a metric standpoint, the other's looked at it fractional or flotation sizes. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that no tire that's out there is exactly the same size as its advertised numbers. So what we want to look at is when we're ready to buy the tire, we want to go and look at the actual specifications and take a look and see, well, what size is this tire really going to be once it's mounted up on the recommended size rim? Quite often we'll find that 35-inch tires are really 33.9 inches tall. And so you want to make sure you look at that so that you know you're comparing apples to apples. While we're on the topic of tires, we're going to talk about airing down, it's called. So when we get off-road, we're actually going to remove some air from the tires and we're going to run them at a lower pressure. This is going to give us a much better footprint. It's going to give us more surface contact, and it's going to give the tire the ability to wrap around an object such as a boulder, just more tread to the pavement, and that's where we're going to get traction. Not to mention it's going to make our ride a lot more comfortable as we're off-road. Lower tire pressure is going to be soak up a lot of those bumps and things that'll chip your teeth, if you will. And as you can see by watching this video, that the tire literally wraps around, and it actually forms around it. It actually just completely wraps around. You can see the tire kind of collapses. This gives us so much more rubber contact that we can get the traction we need to get up over the obstacle.
So after we pick our tire size, the next thing we want to talk about is what are we going to put that tire on? What kind of wheel are we going to put it on? There's so many different wheels. There's so many different choices. Do you want an alloy wheel? Do you want a steel wheel? Do you want a beadlock wheel? Do you know what a beadlock is? So let's talk about wheels, how they're designed, how they're made, what's important to us. Here we have a pretty standard wheel. This is a steel wheel. What we can get from it is it's simple, it's fairly lightweight, it's plain, just kind of standard run-of-the-mill. Inexpensive, not very decorative. Here's the pros and cons. A lot of guys argue that if you bend this wheel off-road and you have a leak like at the bead, like let's say you here where the tire seals up, let's say you bend this out of the way. A lot of the guys argue and say, well, you can beat a steel one back with a hammer and not damage it or have to replace it. Maybe. You probably can't bend it back straight. You're probably going to have quite a bit of run out. And if it's a dual purpose rig, then that's going to be disappointing. A lot of people like the cost of them. You can't argue that. Steel wheels usually going to be a little bit less expensive than the alloy wheels are. Most of the steel wheels are going to have kind of a delicate lip. And so I challenge with the strength of that lip. What does it take to damage this lip on a rock? And I don't think nearly as much. When people talk about the size of the wheel and they're trying to pick out, well, what size rim do I want? Do I want 22s or do I want 17s? And I think we can explain that best by looking at the actual tires. If we look here, we have a much larger rim size. We have a lot less rubber between the tread and the rim. And here on this tire, we have a much smaller rim size. And even though it's a bigger tire and it all makes sense, look at how much rubber we have between the rim. This is a 17, that was a 22. So the rim is 17 inches on this one, the rim is 22 inches on this one. And what's the difference, you might ask? You're going to get a little more flexibility out of this tire. As we air down and we go over obstacles, we're going to be able to soak up a lot more impact with this one versus the 22. The more sidewall we have, the more give and the more rubber cushion that we have. Now, of course, the give and take of that is when it comes into terms of cornering, we have a lot less leverage on the sidewall on that 22 than we do on the 17. And that can make a difference in how it feels around corners when driving on the road. So if you want a tighter, better handling feel on road, that larger rim might be a good choice. If you want the most flexible sidewall and the ability to get through the deepest, toughest things, a little more sidewall is probably going to be your choice. Earlier, we talked about what a beadlock wheel was. Now, this is a beadlock. One of the things that we're going to do when we're off-road is we're going to lower the tire pressure in the vehicle. And we're going to do this so it's softer, so it's more flexible, and so we have more tread contacting the ground. Now, the downside of this is that if we get the tire pressure too low and we get up and we're turned against an obstacle and we're pushing into it, we have the possibility of pushing the tire off the rim. What can happen is here we have a little ridge, and this is called the bead. This is where the bead of the tire sits. This is where it seals. When you push on that tire, this little bead here, this little ridge, is what keeps it on and keeps it from popping off. Once we get into the open center, well, then all the air comes out and we have a flat tire. Standard driving and standard tire pressures, this isn't an issue, but if you get down low enough, it can become an issue. The off-road world has come up with a few different ways to combat this, and one of those is the beadlock wheel. Now, a beadlock wheel is very similar to a standard wheel. The difference is we have this removable ring, and we have an edge on the wheel, or a lip on the wheel, and this is where the bead actually sits. So what we do is we mount the tire, the inner bead goes on there, and then we take our ring, our beadlock ring, and if you'll notice, it's serrated as well to bite into the tire. We set that on, and we torque this down, and we actually sandwich that outer bead between the two lips. And what this means is that you pretty much are going to destroy the tire before it comes off the rim. Pros and cons to this, you might ask. These are very expensive wheels. The legality of their use on road is in question. It is not so much DOT legal as it is DOT compliant. Most of the wheel manufacturers do not have DOT compliance on their beadlock wheel. You will find that most of them are stamped for off-road use only. A lot of people run them on the road. It's not up to me to judge or decide who should and shouldn't. I just want to warn you that there is a lot of maintenance on this wheel. We have to keep these bolts. A lot of times there'll be up to 36 or 40 bolts through one of these wheels. They have to be treated with anti-seize before they're put into the aluminum wheel. They need to be torqued on a regular basis. These bolts will be the only thing holding your tire on the wheel. If these were to break or give out or come loose, then the whole wheel can blow off on the highway, and then you have a problem. People that maintain them generally do not have a problem with them. There is one wheel available, and that's the Hutchison wheel, which is a two-piece beadlock that bolts in the center and uses an O-ring with an inner beadlock spacer that crushes the beads together. That one is DOT compliant. Most of the ones that you're going to see are kind of like this. So those are the most commonly asked questions about wheels and tires. Certainly, if you have anything, any questions, or looking for some advice, or anything outside of what we've talked about, certainly feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, on the internet at axleboy.com. Send us an email. Give us a phone call. Anything that works. We're happy to sit down and talk about pros and cons, ask your questions about wheels and tires, and help you get into the right product first.